Daniel pulled his collar up against the rain. The Kelvin Transit Hub never really slept. Even at this hour, deep into the night shift, the wide loading platforms were busy with movement. Cargo sleds hummed past. Tall alien dock workers moved in groups, speaking in languages that clicked and buzzed. Overhead lights flickered against the wet ground and made long yellow reflections across the puddles. The air smelled like fuel and cold metal and something faintly sweet that Daniel had never been able to name. He had worked here for 2 years. Long enough to know every corner of the place. Long enough to stop noticing how strange it all was. He was heading to the worker exit, bag over one shoulder, boots already soaked through, thinking about nothing except getting home and sleeping. His shift had run 3 hours over. His back hurt. His hands were stiff from the cold. All he wanted was a warm room and a few hours of quiet. That was when he saw her. She was standing near the far end of Platform 7, just past the last row of cargo containers. She was small. Very small. Her back was bent slightly forward and her 4 arms were moving in slow, tired motions. Her skin was pale silver, almost white under the dock lights, and her face was deeply lined with age. She wore a long gray traveling coat that was soaked through at the shoulders. A large supply cart sat beside her, tilted at a bad angle, one of its front wheels stuck and spinning uselessly. Every time she pressed the cart forward, it pulled sharply to the left and nearly tipped. She was alone. Daniel stopped walking. He looked around. The platform was not empty. A group of Brenkai traders walked past in a loose group, talking loudly among themselves. A tall Sulhuri dock official moved along the far edge, checking something on a data pad. 2 more workers crossed behind Daniel without slowing. Everyone was moving. Everyone had somewhere to be. Nobody stopped. Nobody even looked at her. Daniel stood there for a moment. He was tired. He was wet. His exit was in the other direction and the last transit shuttle back to his block left in 20 minutes. If he missed it he would have to wait another hour in the cold. He looked at the old woman again. She had stopped trying to push the cart. She was just standing beside it now, one hand resting on its frame, her head down. She did not call out. She did not wave for help. She simply stood there in the rain, very still, like someone who had learned a long time ago that waiting was easier than asking. Something about that hit Daniel in a way he could not explain. He walked over. He did not think much about it. He just walked over, set his bag down beside his feet, and crouched in front of the cartwheel. Up close he could see the problem immediately. A bent alignment pin had come loose on the front axle. The wheel was not broken. It was just sitting wrong. He reached into the small tool pouch he always kept on his belt, a habit from his first month at the hub, when a supervisor told him a cargo worker with no tools was just a warm body, and pulled out a flat driver and a small gripper wrench. The old woman had not said a word. She watched him quietly. It took Daniel about 4 minutes. The pin was stiff and the rain made everything slippery, but he got it back into position, tightened the lock collar, and gave the wheel a slow turn with his hand. It moved cleanly. He stood up and pressed the cart forward once. It rolled straight and smooth. He looked up at her. She was watching him with large, pale eyes. They were almost completely white, with just a faint ring of gray around the edges. Her expression was calm. Not surprised. Just calm and steady and very, very old. It should roll fine now, Daniel said. He spoke slowly and clearly, the way he had learned to do at the hub when he was not sure if someone understood standard. The pin came loose. It is fixed. She looked at the cart. Then she looked back at him. You stopped, she said. Her voice was soft and a little rough, like dry leaves. Her standard was careful and precise, the way someone speaks a language they learned late in life. Yes, Daniel said simply. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "Where is your shelter?" Daniel pointed toward the worker exit at the far end of the terminal building. "Through there. Then the transit stop outside." She nodded slowly. "Mine is the same direction. The visitor wing. Through the terminal." Daniel picked up his bag. "Then I will walk with you," he said. She did not argue. She did not thank him right away. She simply took hold of the cart handle and began walking, and Daniel walked beside her. It was slow going. She moved carefully, testing each step on the wet ground. Daniel stayed close without crowding her. He did not talk much. He asked her once if the cart was too heavy and she shook her head. He asked once if she was cold and she made a small sound that he took to mean yes but that she was not going to say so. He said nothing more about it. They passed through the main terminal doors. The noise inside was softer. The floor was dry. The lights were warmer. A few people glanced at them as they passed, a tired young human and a small elderly alien woman with a loaded cart, but no one paid them much attention. At the entrance to the visitor wing, she stopped. She turned to face him fully. She looked up at him with those pale eyes and for a moment she did not speak. Then she reached into the front fold of her coat with one of her upper hands. She brought out something small. She held it out to him. It was a stone. Smooth and dark, about the size of his thumb. On its flat face there were symbols cut cleanly into the surface. They were sharp and deliberate, not decorative. They looked important in a way Daniel could not explain. The stone was warm despite the cold and the rain. "I cannot take your," he began. She pressed it into his palm and closed his fingers around it with two of her small hands. Her grip was gentle but firm. "You stopped," she said again. As if that was the only explanation needed. As if that said everything. Daniel looked down at the stone in his hand. Then he looked up, ready to say something more. But she had already turned away. She moved slowly through the visitor wing entrance, her cart rolling quietly beside her, and in a few moments the crowd swallowed her and she was gone. Daniel stood alone at the entrance for a moment. Rain tapped against the terminal windows behind him. The stone sat in his hand, warm and smooth, the strange symbols facing up. He did not know what it meant. He did not know who she was. He slipped it into his jacket pocket and walked to catch his shuttle. Daniel almost forgot about the stone. He came home that night soaked through, ate a cold meal he did not taste, and fell asleep still wearing half his work clothes. The stone sat on his small kitchen table where he had emptied his pockets. It caught the light from the window in a quiet way, the symbols on its face clean and sharp, but Daniel did not look at it again before he closed his eyes. He slept for 9 hours straight. In the morning he showered, made tea, and sat at the table. He picked the stone up and turned it over in his hand. It was still warm. That was the thing he noticed again first. Not the symbols. The warmth. It should have been cold by now, sitting on a table through the night in a small apartment with a heating unit that only worked halfway. But it sat in his palm like something alive, holding a steady, gentle heat that he could not explain. He set it down, put it in his jacket pocket, and went to work. The Kelvin Transit Hub in the morning was a different kind of busy. Louder. Faster. Cargo runs stacked up from overnight and the platforms moved with the kind of controlled noise that Daniel had learned to read the way other people read weather. He clocked in, picked up his assignment sheet, and moved to Platform 3 where a freight delivery had come in 2 hours early and needed sorting. His co-worker was already there. His name was Pete. He was a big man, broad across the shoulders, with a shaved head and a habit of talking while he worked that used to annoy Daniel and now just felt like background noise. Pete had been at the hub for 11 years. He knew almost everything about the place and was not quiet about knowing it. He had also spent 3 of those years working the alien diplomatic docking bays before a scheduling change moved him to general cargo, and he liked to remind people of that too. They worked side by side for about an hour, moving crates and logging cargo tags, before Daniel reached across to grab a scanner from the equipment shelf and the stone slipped out of his pocket. It hit the floor with a sharp, clean sound and spun once before stopping face up, symbols showing. Pete bent down and picked it up before Daniel could. "Dropped your," he started. Then he stopped. He was looking at the stone. His whole manner changed. Not dramatically. Pete was not a dramatic man. But his hands went still and his voice went quiet and he looked at the stone the way a person looks at something they were not expecting to see outside of a story. "Where did you get this?" Pete said. It was not really a question. It came out flat and careful. "An old woman gave it to me last night," Daniel said. "On platform 7. I fixed her cart. She pressed it into my hand before I could say no." Pete looked up at him. "An old woman. Small. Silver skin. 4 arms. Very old." Pete looked back down at the stone. He turned it over once, looked at the blank side, then turned it back. He set it very carefully on the equipment shelf, the way you set something down when you do not want to drop it. "Daniel," he said slowly. "Do you know what this is?" "No," Daniel said. She did not explain it. Pete was quiet for a moment. He scratched the back of his neck, which was something he did when he was thinking through something he was not sure how to say. "These symbols," Pete said, pointing without touching the stone. "I have seen them before. Once. On a diplomatic clearance badge, when I was working the alien docking bays. I asked about it back then and the senior dock officer told me to stop asking and get back to work." He paused. "These are Varek symbols." Daniel did not know the word. "Varek. You do not know the Varek," Pete said. "Should I?" Pete pulled a slow breath. "Most people at this hub do not think about them because they almost never come here. They do not need to. They are one of the oldest clans in the known galaxy. Old in a way that most governments are not. Their territory covers 11 systems. Their ships are allowed in restricted zones that full member nations are locked out of. They have their own laws, their own traditions, and they answer to nobody. When a Varek elder speaks, it carries more weight than a signed treaty from 3 governments put together." Daniel looked at the stone on the shelf. "And the symbols." "This stone," Pete said, and now his voice had dropped lower even though there was nobody near them, "is called a Shulveen. I only know that word because the dock officer used it that one time before he shut the conversation down. It is not something that gets handed out. It is a clan token. A specific one. It marks a life debt, which means a Varek elder has decided that someone did something for them that cannot be repaid with money or goods or favors. It can only be repaid by the clan directly." He looked at Daniel. "It is given by hand. By the elder themselves. To the person they are indebted to." Daniel stared at the stone. "She was just an old woman with a broken cart," he said. "She was a Varek elder," Pete said. "I did not know that. That is probably why she gave it to you." Daniel picked the stone up slowly. It was warm again. He turned it over. The symbols on its face were precise and deliberate. He had noticed that the night before without knowing what it meant. Now they looked different. Not bigger. Just heavier somehow. "What does this mean for me?" Daniel asked. "It means the Varek clan owes you a life debt," Pete said. "Officially. By their law. And their law is not informal. When this token was given, it was recorded somewhere in their clan record. They will know it was given. They will know to whom. And at some point they will come to settle it." Daniel put the stone back in his pocket. He tried to go back to work. He picked up his scanner and moved to the next crate in the row and logged the tag and moved to the next one. His hands were doing the job. His mind was not in it. He kept feeling the warmth of the stone against his leg through the fabric of his pocket and thinking about a small silver-skinned woman pressing it into his hand in the rain without explanation. He had thought it was a kind gesture from a grateful stranger. He did not know what to think about it now. It was just past midday when one of the junior dock coordinators came onto platform 3 moving faster than usual. She stopped when she found Daniel and she looked like someone delivering news she did not fully understand. "There are 2 people at the main entrance asking for you by name," she said. "I do not know what they are. I have never seen anything like them. They are very tall. They are wearing dark blue and they are not moving and they are not speaking to anyone and they are just waiting." Daniel and Pete looked at each other. Pete said nothing. He did not need to. Daniel set his scanner down on the shelf beside the equipment and walked toward the main entrance. The 2 figures standing at the main entrance were impossible to miss. They were tall. Not just tall the way some alien species were tall, where you noticed it and moved on. These 2 were tall in a way that made the entrance hall feel smaller. They stood at nearly 3 meters each, broad and straight, wearing long coats of deep blue that reached the floor. Their skin was the same pale silver as the old woman from the night before, but darker, like silver that had been left in shadow for a long time. Their faces were still and unreadable. They were not looking around. They were not checking data pads or speaking to each other. They were simply standing, arms at their sides, waiting with the kind of patience that suggested they would wait for as long as it took. Every person who walked past them gave them a wide berth without seeming to decide to do so. Daniel walked up and stopped in front of them. They looked down at him. Their eyes were the same pale white as Sarah's, with that faint gray ring at the edges. Up close, Daniel could see that the dark blue coats had small symbols stitched along the collar and cuffs in silver thread. The same kind of symbols that were on the stone in his pocket. "I am Daniel," he said. "I was told you were asking for me." The one on the left spoke. The voice was deep and measured, each word placed carefully. "You carry a shulveen given by Elder Sarah of the Varek clan." It was not a question. "Yes," Daniel said. "We are here to escort you to the vessel. You are not in any trouble. You are not being detained. You may refuse." A short pause. "But we ask that you come." Daniel thought about that for a moment. He thought about Pete's face when he saw the stone. He thought about the warmth of it sitting in his pocket right now. "All right," he said. "Let me tell my supervisor I am leaving." They waited without a word while he did. The Varek diplomatic vessel was docked at the restricted bay on the far eastern edge of the hub. Daniel had never been to that section. Workers were not assigned there. As they walked through the hub, people moved out of the way. Not because of Daniel. Because of the 2 tall figures walking beside him. Conversations dropped. Eyes followed. Even the senior dock officials near the bay entrance stepped aside and said nothing as all 3 of them passed through the security doors without stopping. The ship itself sat behind the bay doors like something from a different age. It was not flashy. It was not built to impress. It was long and dark and smooth, with clean lines that spoke of something very old and very certain of itself. No visible weapons. No bright markings. Just that deep blue-black surface and the same small silver symbols running in a single line along its hull. Daniel followed the 2 guards up the entry ramp and inside. The interior was quiet and dim and cool. The walls were a dark material that absorbed sound. The floors were smooth. There were no screens, no blinking lights, no noise of machinery. Just long corridors and soft overhead light and the feeling of being somewhere that had its own rules. He was brought to a large chamber near the center of the vessel. It was a wide circular room with a high ceiling. Around the curved wall, on a raised platform, sat 7 figures. All of them were Varek. All of them were old, with that same silver skin and pale eyes. They wore long robes in deep blue and gray. They sat still and straight and watched Daniel as he entered and stopped in the center of the room. At the center of the seven, in the highest seat, sat a male Varek who was younger than the others. Not young, but younger. His face was sharp and composed and his pale eyes were fixed on Daniel with an expression that was impossible to read. Nobody spoke for a moment. Then the one in the center said, "You are the human who helped Elder Sarah last night at the Kelvin Transit Hub." "Yes," Daniel said. His voice came out steady, which surprised him a little. "Tell us what happened." "In your own words." Daniel told them. He kept it simple because it was simple. He saw an old woman struggling with a broken cart in the rain. Everyone else walked past. He stopped, fixed the wheel, and walked with her to the visitor wing. She gave him a stone before he could refuse. That was all of it. When he finished, the chamber was quiet again. The one in the center spoke again. "The woman you helped is Elder Sarah. She is my grandmother." Daniel looked at him. "I am High Elder Korath of the Varek clan," the figure said. "My grandmother is one of the most respected elders in our clan's history. She is also, as you may have noticed, deeply stubborn and refuses a security escort when she travels." There was no humor in his voice when he said it. But there was something close to it. She was at the hub last night on personal travel. She was alone by her own choice. When her cart failed, she was stranded on that platform for some time. One of the other council members, an elder woman with 4 arms folded neatly in her lap, leaned forward slightly. "We have reviewed the hub's movement records from last night. 41 individuals passed Elder Sarah on platform 7 in the time she stood there. 31 of them looked directly at her. None of them stopped. The chamber was very quiet. You stopped," High Elder Korath said. "You fixed what was broken. You walked with her so she would not fall on the wet ground. You asked if she was cold." He paused. "You did not know who she was." "No," Daniel said. "I did not." "That is the part that matters to this council," the elder woman said. "You did not help her because of what she is. You helped her because of what she needed." Daniel did not know what to say to that, so he said nothing. Another council member spoke, an old male with deep lines across his face. "In the time we have operated from this sector, we have had dealings with governments, military commanders, trade leaders, and diplomats. We have met beings of great rank and great power." He looked at Daniel steadily. Not one of them stopped for an old woman in the rain. Daniel stood in the center of the room and felt the weight of the silence around him. He was a cargo worker. He sorted freight and fixed equipment and caught shuttles in the cold. He did not think of himself as someone who belonged in a room like this, being looked at by eyes like these. But he had stopped. That part was true. He had stopped because it had not seemed like a choice at the time. It had just seemed like the obvious thing to do. High Elder Korath looked at him from the high seat with those pale, unreadable eyes. "The Shulveen has been given," he said quietly. "The debt is real. And this council will answer it." Daniel had expected to be thanked. Maybe a formal acknowledgement. A handshake of some kind, if Varek did handshakes. Perhaps a gift, something small and ceremonial that he could put on a shelf and look at and tell the story of someday. He had not thought much about what came next when he walked into that room. He had just told himself to stand straight and speak clearly and not say anything foolish. He was not prepared for what actually happened. High Elder Korath looked at him for a long moment after his last words settled in the chamber. Then he turned his head slightly and nodded to someone at the edge of the room. A younger Varek, standing near the wall, moved forward and placed a flat carrying case on the low table that sat between Daniel and the council platform. The case was dark blue, the same color as everything else in this room, and it had those silver symbols running along its edges. "Before this council presents what is owed," Korath said, "we want you to understand something. A Shulveen is not given lightly. In the history of our clan, it has been given fewer than 200 times across many generations. It is not a reward. It is not payment. It is a recognition. It says that what you did cannot be counted in numbers or goods. It can only be answered by something that changes the shape of a life. Daniel stood very still. One of the council elders, the woman with 4 arms, spoke next. Her voice was calm and careful. We asked ourselves what a life debt means for someone like you. We looked into your situation. We hope you will forgive us for that. We needed to understand what shape the answer should take. Daniel felt something tighten in his chest. He did not like the idea of being looked into. But he did not say so. You grew up in the Cauldron district, she continued. In a single-room housing unit with your mother, from the age of 6 onward. You left school at 15 to take work because the household needed income. You have held 11 different jobs in 8 years. You have been at the Kelvin Transit Hub for 2 years, and in that time you have had no complaints filed against you and 4 separate written commendations from senior staff for your work. She paused. You have also applied 3 times to the Aldenmore Technical Institute and been turned down each time because you did not meet the entry requirements for prior education. The room was very quiet. Daniel said nothing. There was a pressure building behind his eyes that he was doing everything he could to hold back. He did not want to fall apart in front of 7 ancient alien elders. He focused on keeping his breathing even. You have been trying, the elder woman said simply. Not with pity. Just with recognition. Korath leaned forward slightly in his seat. The Varek clan formally acknowledges the life debt recorded in the Shelvine given to you by Elder Sarah. In answer to that debt, this council presents the following. The younger Varek at the edge of the room opened the carrying case. Inside, resting in 3 separate fitted sections, were 3 items. Korath spoke clearly and without rushing, giving each word its full weight. First. A full scholarship to the Sarathis Interspecies Engineering Academy. All fees covered for the full duration of the standard program. The Sarathis Academy is the most respected institution of its kind in this sector. It accepts students from 41 species. It has produced engineers, architects, and designers whose work now exists on hundreds of worlds. Your prior education requirements have been formally waived under Varek sponsorship. You will enter as a full student with all the same rights and access as any other. Daniel's mouth opened slightly. He closed it. Second. A letter of Varek sponsorship, bearing the seal of this council and the mark of the High Elder. This letter will be recognized across every system where the Varek clan has standing, which is most of the known systems in this region of the galaxy. It does not guarantee you anything beyond an open door. What you do when the door opens is your own matter. But the door will open. Daniel was gripping the side of his jacket with one hand without realizing it. Third. Housing. A fully covered apartment near the Sarathis Academy for 1 calendar year. Long enough to settle. Long enough to find your footing without the weight of rent pressing down on every decision you make. Korath sat back. This is what the clan offers in answer to the debt, he said. You may take time to consider it if you need. Daniel did not take time. He stood in the center of that quiet room and felt the words land on him one by one, and he could not speak for a long moment because everything was happening somewhere behind his ribs in a place that did not have words yet. He thought about the room he grew up in. The way the ceiling had a water stain in one corner that his mother used to say looked like a running dog. He thought about the night he left school and how he had told himself it was temporary, just for now, just until things steadied. He thought about the 3 rejection letters from Aldenmore. He had kept them all. He did not know why he had kept them. He thought about 2 years of cargo shifts and cold platforms and coming home with a back that ached and hands that were always scraped up from something. He thought about a broken cartwheel in the rain. 4 minutes of work. A stone pressed into his hand. He looked up at Korath. I did not stop for her because I wanted anything, Daniel said. His voice came out a little rough. He did not apologize for it. I want you to know that. I did not know who she was. She was standing there and nobody was stopping and it did not feel right to walk past. We know, Korath said. I am not saying that to seem humble. I am saying it because it is true. We know that too, Korath said. It is why we are not offering you something small. One of the other elders, the old male with the lined face, spoke quietly. We have given gifts to diplomats and commanders before. Large gifts. Political gifts. They were received with calculation, with immediate questions about what came next and what was expected in return. He looked at Daniel steadily. You are the first recipient in my memory who looks like the gift is too heavy to hold. Daniel let out a slow breath. Something almost like a short, quiet sound that was not quite a laugh. It is, he admitted. Then put it down somewhere safe, the elder said, and pick it up again in the morning. That is what heavy things require. Daniel nodded. He accepted. Not with grand words. Not with a speech. He just looked at Korath and said yes, and thank you, and that he would not waste it. Korath nodded once. Slowly. Like someone marking something down in a permanent record. As Daniel was escorted back through the quiet corridors of the ship and down the ramp and out into the ordinary noise of the transit hub, the stone in his pocket felt different. Not heavier. Just more settled. Like something that had finally landed where it was supposed to be. He stood outside in the cold afternoon air and thought about an old woman in the rain who had changed every single thing. 4 months had passed. Daniel still found it strange sometimes, waking up in a clean apartment with a working heating unit and windows that actually sealed against the cold. He would lie there in the first few seconds of the morning and wait for the feeling of wrongness to pass, the feeling that he had walked into someone else's life by mistake and at any moment someone would knock on the door and correct the error. It always passed. But it always came first. The This Interspecies Engineering Academy sat on the upper district of Kelvin Station, 3 levels above the transit hub where Daniel had worked for 2 years. He had passed the lower entrance of the station 100 times without ever looking up and wondering what was above it. Now he walked those upper corridors every day, carrying a student bag instead of a cargo pack, sitting in lecture halls beside beings from species he was still learning the names of, working through problems on a screen instead of with his hands on cold metal. It was hard. He would not pretend otherwise. He was behind in ways that mattered. The other students had foundations he did not have. There were days when the gap felt very wide and very deep and he sat with his study materials late into the night trying to close it by sheer hours alone. But he was not failing. That was the thing that kept him going. He was not failing. His academic advisor, a quiet Brenkai professor named Talon who communicated mostly through written notes even when sitting in the same room, had told him at the end of his second month that his practical problem-solving results were among the highest in his entry group. Not because of what he had been taught. Because of what he already knew from 2 years of fixing things that were broken in conditions that did not allow for mistakes. Daniel had read that note 3 times. It was a Thursday morning when he went to see Sarah. He had been given her location by a junior Varec staff member who had contacted him 2 weeks after his meeting with the council, passing along an open invitation from Elder Sarah to visit when he was ready. Daniel had held on to that invitation for months. Not because he did not want to go. Because he was not sure what he would say. What do you say to someone whose single act of pressing a warm stone into your hand had rearranged your entire life? He figured eventually he would just have to go and find out. Sarah was housed in the Varec residential quarters on the station's eastern wing. It was a calm part of the station. Quieter than anything Daniel had been used to before. The corridors were wider and the lighting was soft and there was actual plant life growing in long containers along the walls, something green and low and slow-moving that breathed a faint clean smell into the air. A young Varek attendant met him at the entrance and walked him to a sitting room near the end of the hall. Sarah was already there. She was smaller than he remembered. Or maybe he had just built her up in his mind across 4 months of thinking about that night. She sat in a wide chair near the window, a blanket across her lap, a small cup of something warm held in 2 of her 4 hands. She wore a simple gray robe. Her silver skin caught the light from the window and her pale eyes found him the moment he came through the door. She looked exactly the same. Calm. Still. And very, very alert. "Daniel," she said. The same careful, precise standard. "Dry leaves." "Elder Sarah," he said. He was not sure of the right greeting, so he dipped his head respectfully and hoped that was acceptable. She gestured to the chair across from her. He sat. For a moment neither of them spoke. It was not uncomfortable. It was the kind of quiet that did not need to be filled immediately. Then Daniel said, "I wanted to thank you. In person. I did not get the chance that night and everything that came after happened so fast that I never." "How are your studies?" she said. He paused. Then he answered her. He told her about the academy. About Talon's note. About the late nights and the wide gaps and the slow, steady work of closing them. He told her about the apartment and the heating unit and the mornings where he still felt like he had walked into the wrong life. She listened without interrupting. She sipped from her cup. She watched him with those pale eyes that missed nothing. When he finished she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I was not lost that night." Daniel looked at her. "My cart was not broken by accident," she said. "The wheel pin was loosened deliberately. By me. Before I took my position on platform 7. The room was very still. Daniel sat with that for a moment. "You broke it yourself," he said slowly. "Yes. And you stood there on purpose." "For 1 hour and 14 minutes, she said. "I counted 41 individuals who passed me in that time. I kept a record in my memory the way I was trained to do when I was young. 31 of them looked directly at me. Some of them slowed down. One stopped 2 meters away, looked at me for several seconds, and then kept walking." Daniel stared at her. "You were testing people," he said. "I was looking for something," she said. Which was not quite the same answer but also was not a denial. "I do this. Not often. But I do it. I find a place where there is enough foot traffic, where the conditions are uncomfortable enough that stopping requires a genuine decision, and I wait. I want to know what beings do when it costs them something small to help and they think no one important is watching." Daniel leaned back slowly in his chair. He thought about the rain. The cold. The 20 minutes he had before the last shuttle. The simple and complete obviousness of stopping that he had felt in that moment, the feeling that not stopping was not really an option he could choose and still feel right about himself afterward. He thought about 41 people walking past. "Why me?" he said quietly. "I mean, why did you give me the stone? If this was a test, you could have walked away and nobody would have known." Sarah looked at him for a long moment. "Because you did not stop because you thought someone important was watching," she said. "You stopped because a person needed help. That is rarer than you think. That is rarer than most people will ever understand." She set her cup down carefully. The stone was not a reward for passing a test. It was recognition of something that should be common and is not. Daniel looked at his hands. He did not have a response to that. He was not sure one existed. He stayed another hour. They talked about small things after that. The academy. The station. The plants in the corridor outside that she had requested personally because she missed growing things. It was easy conversation, the kind that does not require effort to keep moving. When he left, he walked back through the eastern wing and up through the academy corridor toward his afternoon lecture. A group of students passed him going the other way, 3 of them, 2 Sulhuri and a human girl he recognized from his engineering fundamentals class. He caught a piece of what they were saying as they passed. One of the Sulhuri said something low and the human girl nodded and said, "Yes, that is him. The one the Varek sponsored. He was a cargo worker. He just stopped to help someone." They were past him before he could hear more. Daniel walked on. The stone was not in his pocket today. He kept it on the shelf beside his bed now, in the apartment with the working heating unit, where he could see it every morning when he opened his eyes. He did not need to carry it anymore. He already knew what it meant.